Hey everybody, great to have you back here in the fish tank. It's time for our monthly look at the Minion Masters Meta. That's right, we're going to go through and have a look at the data that I've collected all this season from the leaderboards, and we're going to have a look at, based on that, what is the most popular Masters, cards, and of course decks. So we're going to have a lot to go through as always. So if you do need to watch the video multiple times, if you do need to pause the video, whatever, of course it's fine. And as a reminder, if you go to my website badasthefish80.com, you'll find all of the slides that we use in this video for your consumption. Now, if you are new to Mini Masters, if you're new to my channel, I would love to have you along for the ride. So if you do enjoy my content, feel free to give it a thumbs up or subscribe. Okay, so we've got a lot to go through. Let's dive in. Right, so let's have a look at our master popularity. So, of course, we're looking at the current season, which is version 2.21. And this little graph shows us overall master popularity in the 3 ranked modes. So each master has a bar, and it has 3 sections, considering yellow for 1v1, 2v2 randoms is red, and 2v2 pre-mades is blue. And straight away we can see Morelia is the most popular master overall. And that's something we've seen for a while. But as you can see here, Milloween not too far behind. They're in second place. Apep is up there in third. And of course, at the other end of the scale, pretty underplayed masters. We've got Setsu, Valorian, which is interesting because, of course, a few seasons ago, Valorian was massively played, especially in solos. But a couple of nerfs to his ult perks, and that dropped off a lot. Also wrecked down there. Right. So what changed the most? Well, we saw an increase this season to Ravager, and that's going to be quite specifically because of the buff that Ravager got in the last patch. So if you're familiar, all masters have alternate master perks, and Ravager did get a buff to his alternate perk 1, which is the Overpower, where it's now all 4+ minions get that increased attack to start with, as opposed to just melee minions, I think it was before. So Ravager went up quite a lot, and of course Valorian did drop off even further. Right, let's break this down so we can compare and contrast this season to last season. So this is that same data, but in a pie chart. We've got a pie chart on the left for last season, and a pie chart on the right for this season. So we can see Morelia, the yellow, is still number 1. Milloween still number 2. Apep's popped up to 3 as Stormbringer's dropped off a decent amount. So as we mentioned, Ravager went up the most because of that Overpower buff. Right, so that's overall, but let's break it down into the separate game modes. So first of all, we're going to look at solo. So the same setup last season, this season. We can see that Milloween was the most popular master in solos last season, and the same this season. Morelia and Apep have switched their positions. Apep, the darker blue, is in second, and Morelia, the yellow, is in third. Now, average mana cost generally stays the same. Of course, if you're new to the game and you're trying to build decks, you want an average mana cost sort of between 3 on the lowest and 4.5 on the highest, and a nice mana curve within there. So that's the situation in solos. And as I mentioned, Ravager did have the biggest overall increase and has the biggest increase in solos. And interestingly, when we look at the win rates of the stats for this season, and we've only got early season stats to go on, but his Ravager with the alternate perk 1 and perk 3 had the highest win rate, 65%. So not a heavily played master, but his play rate's gone up a lot. And people that are playing him are getting a lot of wins from that. And Valorian did drop off quite substantially. Okay, so that's the situation in solos. Let's have a look at randoms. So we can see randoms last season was Milloween, Morelia, Volko. This season it's Morelia, Milloween, Mordar as the top 3. Average mana cost 3.9 hasn't really changed. And interestingly, in randoms this season, Tronvir has seen the biggest increase. So Tronvir is kind of like the light, really light reddy pinky colour. Not really pink, but very light red there. So we can see Tronvir is in 5th place this season. Last season he was down in nothing place. So Tronvir's got up a lot. Volko has dropped off a lot. So in randoms, Morelia, and I've played a lot of Morelia in randoms, and From the stats, her ult perk is apparently better, but I find using the standard perk especially in randoms, because randoms is all about dealing with your teammate, and the more versatile you can be, the better. And I find the versatility of Morelia allowing you to choose specifically with her default perk whether you want the skeletons, whether you want the heal, whether you want the spirit or the spell reduction is, in my opinion and in my experience, more powerful than her ult perk. Right, so randoms: Morelia, Milloween and Mordor as the top three. And then if we switch to pre-mades, we can see again Morelia was first last season and indeed first this season. Mordor is second, and I think one of the reasons we see Mordor more prevalent in pre-mades than we do in randoms is just because Mordor decks tend to be heavy decks that really succeed when they're supported appropriately, and that's something you're going to struggle with in randoms. And of course in pre-mades you play with someone that hopefully has a brain on your level and also has built a deck to support you. And we can see in pre-mades the average mana cost is a little bit higher where you can get away with it. So yeah, Mordor did have the biggest increase in pre-mades this season. Tromvir did drop off quite a lot. And then the last bit we're going to look at regarding the Masters is the draft. Now, if you're not familiar with draft, that's the game mode where you build a deck from random choices. You choose one of 3 Masters, and then each card you build, you get 3 choices. So things are going to be a little bit different in draft than they are in constructed, but of course trends will appear if enough data is seen. And we can see here Morelia, 25% of draft last season. This season, still in first place, 16%, but did drop off quite substantially. Now, interestingly, Setsu is the second most popular master in draft. Didn't really see that coming, and if we look at last season, Setsu was nowhere. So Morelia, Setsu and Tromvir, the top 3 in draft for this season. So as we said, Setsu went up quite a lot, Morelia did drop off substantially. Right, we're going to move on to the rarity. When we talk about rarity, we're talking about the cards in Minion Masters. Each card has one of 4 rarities. It's common, it's rare, it's supreme, or legendary. And unlike a lot of other games, the higher the rarity in Minion Masters doesn't mean necessarily stronger. And you can see a load of graphs here, but all you really need to take into account is the fact that on average, the decks are made of mostly common and rare cards with some supreme and legendaries in there. It's not pay to win in any way, shape or form. Right, so that's something to keep in mind. Right, next up, factions. So factions are kind of families of cards. We have 9 of those in Minion Masters. And we can see overall the most familiar, most common faction this season is Accursed. So Accursed has gone up. But why has that? Because Accursed was 3rd last season and now is in 1st. And that's because of a number of buffs to Accursed cards. So last season, or sorry, this season, we had buffs to Nivir Slumbers, to Bara, I said that kind of weird, and to Nazara, which definitely increased their play rate, which overall increased the Accursed play rate. So Accursed, the faction of choice for this season, Scraps dropped down to 2nd and Voidborn down to 3rd. Now, if you are even more interested and you want to break it down by the different game modes, you can do, but we have a lot to go through here, so we won't spend any additional time on that. But reminder again, all of these slides are available on my website. Right, next up we're going to have a look at the wildcards. So what are wildcards? Wildcards are duplicates, kind of, if they called them duplicates or something, it would make more sense to me. Having played Minion Masters for so long, wildcard just intrinsically makes sense to me, but new players, wildcard doesn't really make sense, right? A wildcard is kind of like a joker that can be anything, but that's not what it is in Minion Masters. It's a duplicate. You can have 2 wildcards, you can have 3 copies of 1 card or 2 copies of 2 cards. So we can see, of course, no wildcards in solos or pre-mades, and wildcards in randoms has dropped off from last season. Nearly 79, so 80% of decks in randoms, no wildcards. Insert clap sound effect. And we can see only 9.7% of decks with 2 wildcards. Okay, so that's wildcard usage, but what wildcards are being used? So the top wildcard is Slitherbound. And just a quick overview of how these slides work, because we'll have a lot in this format. Each card And we'll take, for example, Slitherbound as our sort of example. Each card has a border. The colour of the border tells you what has happened this season compared to last season. So green means its rank's gone up. Red means it's gone down. White means it's a new card, which of course we don't have, but maybe one day. And black means the rank is the same. So Slitherbound is green. Its rank's gone up. It has 2 numbers. The top left number for Slitherbound is 1, which is our current season position for Slitherbound. And the top right number is the last season, 10. So 1 is less than 10, lower numbers are better, therefore it's green. So Slitherbound is the most wildcarded card, and these change quite a lot sometimes because cards lose their copies allowed stat if they're sort of seen as abusively wildcarded. So these change quite a lot. So Slitherbound, Bridge Buddies, Kamikaze Zeppelin going up there from 27th up to 3rd. Hillpuff drops down to 4th, but still a solid performance. Veilstalker going up from 35th to 5th. And Azog 69 to 6th. So some real big increases there. And again, with there we see Resonating Blast Crystal up from 102nd, basically unwildcarded, to 10th. Okay, so Slitherbound, as we saw there, is the new #1 wildcard of choice. And looking at the stats, it did see the biggest increase overall compared to all the other wildcards. So Slitherbound and Azog went up a lot. Infiltration dropped off. Hillpuff still there in 4th, did drop off a lot as well. Right, let's have a look at cards in general. So these are the top cards overall, based on their leaderboard appearances for all of the ranked modes. And we can see here that Scrat Horde is first and was first last season. And I was thinking about how strong this is, and I looked back in the stats, and I saw that before it was buffed from 8 to 10 minions to Scrats, it was still performing very well. So it was a strong card that then got buffed and is now everywhere. So I feel like that was a bit of a misstep by the balance process within Minion Masters, which of course you can get involved in if you go to the Discord. Link will be in the description. So Scrat Horde, Skeleton Crew 2nd from 3rd, Hillpuff 3rd from 2nd, so they've switched around a little bit, but you can see those 3 basic cards are the top cards because they're just so cheap, they're so efficient, and they're very flexible, and they do exactly what they say on the tin. And we can see there Blast Monster is 4th, up from 6th, and I do feel like the Blast Monster, in my experience, is too strong in regards to its own DPS. It solos far too many situations now that I don't think it should. It should be a card that can only really solo the lightest of hordes and needs support, and that's not the case at the moment. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a nerf to his DPS at some point. And a Cleaver there, 5th. Down a little bit from 4th, but nothing there. But yeah, we can see top cards, lots of basic cards. And as we go back to talking about the rarities, 13 of these top 27 cards are common, 7 are rare, 4 supreme, and only 3 of these top quote-unquote cards are legendary, which, if we have a quick look, we've got the Veilstalker there in 26th, we've got Morgrel the Swarmer King in 19th, and the Reckonator in 16th. And as always, it blows my mind every time, but it always happens, so I don't know why. But every card was seen at least once on the leaderboard. So what I'm going to do is put a pinned comment on the video. So if you could pause the video now, take a moment to find that comment, and let me know, what do you think is the least used card based on this data set? It'd be interesting to see what people's guesses are. Some people get it immediately, some people have awful guesses, but it's always fun to have a look at that. And of course, engage the algorithm. Your comments really do help this video, so please do that. Okay, so let's break the top cards down now into the different modes. So solos, randoms, and pre-mades. And one thing we're going to do is we're going to look at non-spells and spells separately. And the reason we do that is generally when you're building a deck, you look at those two things kind of separately. You think, okay, I want 3 spells and 7 cards. And when we say cards, we're sort of talking minions or buildings. Right, so again, if we look in solos, Scrat Horde, we've seen how strong that was overall. Hillpuff, Swarmers, so top 3 cards, very basic cards, very, very strong, very, very common. Feng the Wanderer there in 4th place, we've seen a lot of him. Hasn't been buffed but people are really finding how strong he is. Remember, the way Feng the Wanderer works is that he gets buffed based on the other cards in your hand, and the buffs he gets depends on the factions of the cards in your hand. So, for example, if you have a Voidborn card in your hand, when you play him, he gets Rage, and so on and so forth. So he's gone up from 68th overall in solos to 4th, so massive increase for him. And then if we look at randoms, we start to see things that are more AoE centric, like the Blastmancer, the Reconator, the Whirly Scrat. They come into they just get much more value. And then we can see again Skeleton Crew in randoms, Blastmancer, Heal Puff, and in pre-mades the top cards. Skeleton Crew still first, Blastmancer still second. Right, so those are the top non-spell cards in those modes. Let's have a look at the top spell cards. And one thing that's interesting, and I think we saw this a little bit last season where Beam of Doom was third in solos, it's now first, the removal spell of choice in solos. That just gives us an idea of what the solo meta is, and generally that means that there's going to be lots of big clumps of units. So, you know, you kind of think of Beam of Doom as a removal spell for 2v2s, but in solos it's heavily played, and it's heavily played for a reason. Bridge Buddies, obviously not a removal spell, and Arcane Barrage. Arcane Barrage is an interesting one because it's kind of like the Demon Warrior of spells, where you want it in a cheaper deck. Every time you use it, it gets stronger. So that gives you an idea that the people are using that in some pretty cycly decks. And of course, then when we get to pre-mades and randoms, we see again Beam of Doom. Not surprised there. Bearvalanche, didn't see it too much in solos. Magma Storm, I play that in randoms, and I feel like that's a very, very strong spell at the moment. And of course, we see a lot of things where anything that's heavy area removal, like for example the Rock and Roller there in 9th place in randoms, that can get a lot of value. I've seen a wild-carded Rock and Roller where you've got 3 of those, and late game it's kind of disgusting. I feel like that shouldn't have its copies allowed. But early game, it does make your hand very awkward. Okay, so those are the top spells. Let's have a look at the top legendaries. So, reminder, we spoke before about how decks are not all made of legendaries, but generally decks have legendaries, and some of them are built as sort of the core of the deck, and the deck is built around them. So if you're new to Minion Masters, and, you know, getting legendaries is always cool, especially if you're new to the game. And this will give you an idea of, especially if you're thinking about crafting legendaries, which ones are quote-unquote good and heavily played. And of course, some of them are very deck-specific. For example, they're in 5th place in randoms, Nearvir the Fallen. Of course, you're just going to build an Accursed deck around that. Whereas a lot of the other cards, for example, the Veil Stalker, Stixie, you throw them in any sort of kind of deck. So the top legendaries in solos, we had Feng the Wanderer. As we saw, his play rate's gone up massively. Morgrel in 2nd place, Jinglong up to 3rd from 4th. Jezra still there, still doing strong. And in randoms and in pre-mates, the Reconator definitely very powerful in the top in the 2v2 modes. Stixie gone up quite a lot from 19th to 3rd in randoms there, and that's based on the fact that, remember, in the current patch, the most recent balance, the snipers got buffed. Was it this season or last season? But Stixie definitely got an HP buff. I think the snipers might have got buffed in the last patch, and then the patch after that, this patch, a bit confusing, Stixie got a buff, so only 10 more HP, but suddenly Stixie doesn't die to the Pincer of Dread, and suddenly Stixie becomes far more powerful. And as we mentioned before, Nearvir the Fallen, we've seen a lot more Nearvir in randoms, and there's a very strong Accursed deck near the top of randoms. And what I found from playing against that is you get the period where you get your Ascension, so you play your first Nearvir, then you get perk 3, so you get your follow-up Nearvir as soon as the first Nearvir dies, and of course it comes with the breath. And then while you're dealing with, whilst that's going on, you cycle to your next Nearvir. So there's that period where you can get 3 Nearvirs basically back to back. And from what I've seen, that is really where that deck can win that game, where you lose so much XP dealing with those dragons. And I actually changed my deck to include a Curse Bearer specifically to deal with that situation. Okay, so Yeah, Nirvir. We haven't seen too much Nirvir in pre-maze, but definitely in randoms. And as we mentioned before, things like Nirvir being played more often, it did get a buff. It costs less after a Cursed Ascension to cycle it. And of course, because people are playing more of that, people are playing more Accursed decks, and then the Accursed faction gets played more. So those are the top legendaries for the different modes. So now we're going to just have a quick look at draft. So remember, as we spoke earlier about draft, where draft was where you're building your deck from your random choices. So we can see here, Assassin is the choice. Net Blaster, of course, did get a buff recently where it imposes slow. So, and that's perma-slow, I think, on the minions. So it's actually very strong. I've seen a lot of decks, seen a lot more of it in just general constructed, especially in randoms. But Net Blaster is the second most played card in draft. Priestess going up to third from 22nd. Shadow Whelp still seeing a lot of play. Was first last season, but of course, draft by its nature, these top cards will change just because of the randomness. So if you're building draft, this might be a good image to keep to your side when you're building your cards, building your decks, to see which cards are seen as strong. But of course, you still need to take into account synergies with other cards, your decks, overall construction, the master, and stuff like that. So yeah, Net Blaster did see the biggest increase overall, and definitely getting a lot of value there. And Net Blaster is one of those cards where you do need to be aware of it. And if you're building a constructed deck, you'll think about maybe what removals you have to deal with that. But of course, when you get into draft, you don't have that luxury. Right, next up we have a look at the draft spells. And Infiltration is still top, as it was last season. Remember, Infiltration did get that buff, so there is no delay when the Infiltration drops. There's no summoning sickness, which they had before. It has the rush keyword, so as soon as they drop, they will find a target and start shooting. So it is very difficult to stop it getting value. Dragon Ball there. Lightning Bolt, that's a classic draft card where, you know, people will build decks in constructed with things like the Lightning Bolt in mind so they don't get punished by it, whereas in draft you can't necessarily do that. And if you end up with a draft deck with all heavy cards and you come up against a Lightning Bolt, you are just kind of out of luck. So Lightning Bolt going up there from 35th to 3rd, Morgul's Mark from 22nd to 4th, and Scrotillery, always a strong card. Jungle Jumble did get that buff recently, where you get more reliability. It's going to give you a small, medium, and a large card rather than just complete randomness. Right, so those are our top spells in draft. Right, thanks for joining me for that first part of this video. So what we've done so far is we've looked at the masters and we've looked at the cards. Now we're going to put them together into the top decks. Now there's many different ways you could approach this, but basically the way that we're looking at the top decks is taking into account the average rank of the cards and the position that the deck was seen on the leaderboard, and then using that data we look at what are the top decks. And then we look at the top deck for each master. So we have a good representation of all the masters, but of course some masters are just generally stronger than others. So we're going to start off with looking at the top decks in solos. So just to reiterate, we were looking at the position of the deck and the average rank of the cards. So for example here, Milloween, the top deck here in solos, was seen in first place on the leaderboard, and the average rank of the cards, where the lower the better, was 10.9, and for comparative sake, Apep was also seen as first on the leaderboard, where the average rank of their cards were 28.3. So basically we're looking at the cards that are high up on the leaderboard with the best cards. So the top deck here is Milloween, and as general what we'll see is Cheap Cycle, and we saw how strong the cards like the Heel Puff, the Bridge Buddies, the Skeleton Crew, the Scrat Horde, we saw how heavily played they were overall, and there's a good reason for that. And then of course we have some spells in the form of Daggerfall, Pincer of Dread, Blind Date, and Beam of Doom. Beam of Doom, of course, the big removal spell that's going to help you out of a lot of situations. Now, one thing we can't tell from the leaderboard, unfortunately, is which alternate perk they are using. So remember, all the masters have at least one alternate perk. You can change that within the master select screen or within the match itself. Now, Milloween's ult perk is the perk 2 ult perk, which is the replacement to the arcane missiles, and is the Zanian spellbook, which you can choose one of 4 spells. Now, I can't remember from the stats which is most played, which is the strongest in that situation. But either or, if you want a cheap cycle deck, then you'll probably stick to the standard perk. And it looks like the spells that they already have deal with most situations, so they might not need that spell book. So that might just be the standard perk. Let me know what you think. Right, next up we have APEP. Again, cheap cycle at one end. We spoke about the Arcane Barrage being the Demon Warrior of spells, so that's going to be... You basically want to use that as often as possible and get it as strong as possible for the late game. Curse Bearer, which is an interesting one to see in solos. And again, a Curse Bearer in solos tells us there's likely to be big units in the meta. And again, things like the Magma Cannon will help deal with those. And there we saw Feng in the top 2 decks. Right, next up we have King Puff. As always, you're likely to see King Puff have a lot of Horde to generate those Night Puffs at perk 3. We have the Blue Golem and Bounce Breeze Flingers, where you're going to get the Growth Burst Shroom to buff the Blue Golem. And then we have the Scrutillary AoE, Morgrel, and the Laser Turret to deal with big things. Right, next up we have a Volko deck, and from playing against this, one of the things that I've seen is this Frostfang Familiar can get so much value. Because remember, they changed the Frostfang Familiar so it gives spirit to the thing that it hugs, the friendly unit. And often what can happen, if you don't have a good way of dealing with that, you'll kill the first unit and then it will just recycle to the next thing. And it can end up giving 3 or 4 spirits, which is just massively valuable. And the other interesting thing about this deck is Jezra the Void Mother. If you played against this deck, you'll know how powerful she is. But interestingly, if you look at the stats, the win rate stats for her, she's not actually doing that great, especially in 2v2. But the problem with her is that she's okay in her base form, but once she gets, especially in this deck, she gets Rage, and she gets, from the Frostfang Familiar, the Vampiric, where she heals herself, and the Spirit, she becomes very, very difficult to deal with. Remember, her attack is like a massive whirly scrap. So melee is very difficult to play into her. So things like the Beam of Doom will be really powerful in that situation. Then we have a similar to we've seen before, Tromvir deck. Ravager, as we spoke about earlier, Ravager does have the highest win rate with his ult perks based on the early season stats. Morelia, now Morelia, quite possibly ult perk Morelia, not sure, but the stats show that's good. Ratbow, probably standard Ratbow perk. It's got some good Horde in there to get some good Daka value. Next up we have a Diona deck featuring the Jungle Jumble, which we mentioned earlier did get that buff, so it is more reliable. And remember, your Jungle Jumble based units will come with that Growth Burst Shroom, which will power up your Shen's Shock Stick. Next up we see Wrecked, very cheap cycle Wrecked, with again the Frostfang Familiar, the Rock Rivals trying to do that little combination there. Setsu, so with Setsu we're looking at what spells they have. They have a bunch of spells here, so that's going to be the default perk Setsu. And nice to see the ATG drone in there, which can be difficult to deal with if you don't have the appropriate use case. Right, next up Valorian. What do we have here? Vux Clutch Cooker. Could be a Jackier deck. He kind of loves Vuk. Then we have Stormbringer, very cheap Stormbringer deck. And as you can see, they're just going to be trying to cycle to the Resonating Construct. The Bounty Sniper trying to give you that value to keep in with the XP game. Arcane Barrage, perfect for cycling. And it'd be interesting to see, there are some ranged units in here, but this might be using the ult perk from Stormbringer, where instead of buffing your ranged units at perk 2, it gives you that Cloud Cover, which is a protective spell, really, where it lifts something off the ground, so you can pull it out of Bearavalanche, for example, and it gives it a shield, so you can protect it from, for example, a fireball. and it gives it an empowered attack while it's in the air. And then finally here we have a Mordor deck. Spirit Mordor, Rampage, Priestess. We know how that kind of works. Right, so those are the solo decks. Next up we have the random decks. Now this top deck is the deck I've been playing. Have I been playing it because it's a top deck? Is it the top deck but I've been playing? I don't know. But that's the situation that we have here. Very, very versatile deck. As I mentioned earlier, I do use the default perk for Morelia. I do like that reliability. Magma Storm, I find, does get a lot of value. And once you get used to it, playing it smartly, you don't whiff them very often. Right, next up we have a cheap, pretty cycly Milloween deck. And we've got a couple of things in there that will really benefit from the cheap cycle. The Future Past and the Arcane Barrage. But of course, you can't get away with really cheap decks anymore in 2v2, so they do have things like the Magma Storm and the Cleaver to help out where necessary. Next up we see Volko. The Zap Shrine can be very powerful, especially if you play it with your brain engaged, because it does make the bridges very difficult to play into, and you can get punished if you do that. And one of the things they do have is the Shock Rock as well, so a lot of stuns available in there to try to help them to trade well. Layla's Vortex did get a buff where I think it pulls stronger now, so less things can run out of it. And one thing I do remember from looking at the stats over the last few seasons is Volko's ult perk 3, the Infinite Rage, has definitely been very strong as always, but now after it got changed fairly recently, it's very strong in 2v2s. Because you can just rage so many units and suddenly your whole army is raged, whereas prior to perk 3 it was not. Right, next up we have Tromvir, and again we see the Net Blaster in there as we spoke about earlier, how powerful that can be. The Veil Stalker, Jackia hates the Veil Stalker, but play randoms and you'll see how much value the Veil Stalker does get. And again we can't tell which old perk Tromvir is using there. Next up we have Stormbringer. So this is again probably going to be ult perk Stormbringer, trying to protect the Bounty Sniper and the Stixie. Bara did get buffed recently, and Reconator is always strong in there. Okay, and one thing to note, if you look at this Rec deck, there's a couple of little wildcard icons above the Last Stand and the Bara the Witch Wolf, which you don't really see on any of the other top leaderboard decks, which is great to see. People are not relying on busted wildcards. They are just making smart and appropriate decks. Okay, next up we have King Puff. I feel like this is the King Puff that I played for a good while. It's very, very strong. You do have to play with your brain engaged though, because it has a lot of Horde, which will get punished by a Blast Monster, which you can almost guarantee your opponent has. So you do have to keep that in mind with the Blast Monster on and off the field. Okay, again, here we have Ravager. Nothing really too exciting about that. Apep, Diona, we're seeing the Mountain Shaper there. Mountain Shaper can get a lot of value, but I do see people using it when they really shouldn't. Remember, you want to use minions over spells if possible, because minions give you that ongoing value rather than just the one-time thing from the spell. So if you do use the Mountain Shaper, it is very strong if you use it against a lot of stuff. But remember, it costs you a lot, it takes a long time to charge up, so you do want to use it sparingly. Right, again, we see a Mordor deck with spirits in the form of Spirit Mancer, Frostfang. We've got the Black Hole, which can make those decks very difficult to deal with if you only have one heavy removal spell on your randoms team. Next up, we have Setsu. We've got some spells in there, so it's going to be default Setsu with some Shen Stormstrike and Stormy action. Cheap Ratbo deck here. So Demon Warrior, which is the Demon Warrior of minions, and Arcane Barrage, which is the Arcane Barrage of the Demon Warrior of spells. So it's just cycle based with the Demon Warrior and the Brothers of Void being the top end. And then we have a Valorian deck. High Marshal Rystar, plus a few other Empyrean cards, and then a bunch of puffs, really just to cycles. Right, so those are the top random decks. And then we'll have a look at the top pre-mades. And as I always say, remember, pre-made decks are often built with other specific decks to carry them or play with them in mind. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these. So Tromvir is the top one there, followed by Morelia. Morelia here, we do have the Rock'n'Roller, Scritillary, Bevelanche as the 4+ mana spells. So that could be using the spell reduction as appropriate. And one thing that puts me off with the alt perk of Morelia is you don't have those 3 spells, then you often just get wasted or just inefficient value from the spellbook. Okay, next up we have Milloween. Again, Rock'n'Roller there is a big clear, Scritillary as a big clear. King Puff with the Horde as you would expect. Diona, so a lot of very similar decks here, and sometimes what we get in pre-mades, because it's not, it is the least played game mode of ranked, or maybe, no, it's probably not the least played game mode in the game, that'll be Mayhem, but definitely in ranked, you see a lot of similarities. Sometimes people are just testing out different decks, different masters, stuff like that. So again, a similar thing for APEP. Then we see Volko. We spoke about Volko with the old perk, how it could be very strong in late game. Now we have Wrecked, Stormbringer. So this will be Stormbringer using the normal perk. He's got a lot of ranged minions to benefit from that extra range at perk 2. Ravager, very cheap low end, powerful top end, plus Spirit. Spiritmancer can be so strong, but I do feel like it is the most misplayed card in the game. If you're playing a Spiritmancer and you get a Spirit on a Scrat, that is not value. Okay, you've got to be smart with it. When you play it, you've got to think, okay, is the things that I can grab Spirit from? If that's yes, then go on to number 2. Is the things that can receive this Spirit? And if that's yes, then think about playing it. If either of those questions are no, don't play it. If you play it into a load of Scrats and you have no mana to get minions down, your teammate has no mana to get minions down, that is not a good use of the Spiritmancer. So very, very strong card, but also probably one of the most misplayed cards. Okay, closing out pre-mades, we see the Revenant in there with the Setsu, pretty cheap cycle Setsu. Mordor, remember you can't res you can't res Puffs with Mordor, so you can comfortably include them in your deck. Probably normal perk Mordor, but not sure. Ravager, probably alt perk Ravager, doesn't have too many things here to empower the Daka. And then finally here we have Valorian. Right, we got through the deck. So hopefully if you've made it this far, it's given you a good idea of what's strong in the terms of masters, what's strong in the terms of cards, and then put them together and have a look at the decks. So if you're looking to try out decks for the different modes, for different masters, this is definitely a great place to start. Now, what we're going to do in the next section is we're just going to very quickly go through, and we're not even going to talk about them. So if you do want to see this data, you can pause the video, or you can go onto my website, as I mentioned before, badassofficiating.com, and see all these slides. But it just gives you extra information should you wish to consume it. So the first thing we're going to do is have a look at basically just extended versions of what we've covered so far. So for example here, top non-spells in solos. So remember we looked at the top 9 before, now we see the top 27 for example. So here are these are the top cards overall. I'm looking at the next slide. And then we have the top cards non-spells, and then we have the top spells, and finally the top legendaries in solos. And of course we have that for the different modes as well. So again, the top cards in randoms, top non-spells in randoms, top spells in randoms, and top legendaries. And then closing that section out, we have the top pre-made cards, top non-spells pre-made cards, and top spells in pre-mates. And then finally the top legendaries in pre-mates. Okay, back to me. Almost done. I know there's a lot of data here, but hopefully it's useful, and if you made it this far, big thumbs up. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the cards specifically for each master, for each mode. So if you're thinking about, oh, I want to build an APEP deck for solos, what are the top cards? This will again be perfect for you. But boy, are we going to go through this quickly. Right. And one thing to mention, if you look at the bottom of the slide, it gives you an idea of how many decks were used to build this. So sometimes there's very few decks, so the data is not particularly reliable. So for example here, we've got 48 solo APEP decks to drag our information from. So here we go, top cards for APEP in solos, in randoms, in pre-mades. Next up we have Diona in solos, Diona in randoms, Fiona in pre-mades. Following along, we have King Puff in solos. King Puff in randoms. King Puff in pre-mades. Top cards for Milloween in solos. Randoms. Pre-mades. Mordor in solos. Mordor in randoms. Mordor in pre-mades. Morelia in solos. Morelia in randoms. Morelia in pre-mades. Then we have Wrecked here in solos. Wrecked in randoms. Wrecked in pre-mades. And Ratbo in solos. Ratbo in randoms. Ratbo in pre-mades. Ravager now in solos. Randoms. Pre-mades. Setsu in solos. Setsu in randoms. Setsu in pre-mades. Stormbringer in solos. Stormbringer in randoms. Stormbringer in pre-mades. Tronvir in solos. Randoms. Pre-mades. Nearly there. Valorian in solos. Valorian in randoms. Valorian in pre-mades. And finally, Volko in solos. Volko in randoms. And Volko in pre-mades. We did it. We got through it all. Guys, thanks so much for staying the course if you did so. I hope you find this interesting, whether you're a new player or an experienced player. As I've said about 18 times, this information will be available on my website, badasfish80.com. So if you do want to go there, you can see all of these slides and take your time to look at them, should you wish to do so. And as I said earlier, if you are new to the channel, would love to have you along. So if you hit that subscribe button, you'll stay up to date with all things Minion Masters related. And of course, if you did enjoy the video, a thumbs up means the world. And that's pretty much all I wanted to cover today. I am Bad as a Fish, and this is an awkward wave.